Operation Red Dog, also known as Bayou of Pigs, also known as KKK on the King Kong Island. This is a story about how American mercenaries, neo-Nazis, and Klansmen, assisted by black revolutionaries and Rastafarians, attempted to take over a small island country in the Caribbean. It's an important part of the history of the American far right, and a story so ridiculous you won't believe it's actually true. This is Lesser Antilles island chain in the Caribbean Sea. This little dot here is the island of Dominica, land of lush mountainous rainforests, home of 70,000 people. 86% of them are African, another 9% are multiracial, about 1% of the population is white. The official language is English. You've probably seen Dominica in Hollywood movies. Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest was filmed here. More than 400 Dominicans were employed during the shoot. The island is a home of a militant Rastafarian movement called the Dreads. They worship Jah, partook in the sacramental smoking of marijuana, and occasionally killed a tourist or two. In the 70s, the Dreads waged a low-intensity war against the government called the Rasta War Against Babylon. In other words, Dominica was a perfect place to establish a white supremacist ethnostate. Operation Red Dog, Chapter 1: Warlockracy and Pseudo-Posadism. But this story doesn't begin on Dominica. Sir Eric Gairy was the first Prime Minister of the island nation of Grenada in the Caribbean Sea. A tiny country of about 100,000 people, Grenada is known as the Island of Spice due to its production of nutmeg and mace crops, of which it is one of the world's largest exporters. Sir Gairy was an interesting man. He was what they now call red-pilled. He was red-pilled on great many things. Sir Gairy was a mystic, a sorcerer, and a ufologist. His office was filled with magazines about spirituality and flying saucers. He kept items of alchemical value: a mummified donkey's eye, strange powders, saltpeter. Gairy believed he possessed the power to make his political opponents suffer sleeplessness by transmitting love waves with his mind. He was convinced that aliens had been secretly visiting Earth to help humanity. This intersection of ufology and politics wasn't as original as it might seem. This approach was first pioneered by Latin American Trotskyist Juan Posadas back in the 60s, and his take on aliens was somewhat more philosophically sophisticated, combining ufology with Marxist determinist worldview. You see, since advances in society come from advances in technology, these extraterrestrials must come from a far more advanced society than Earth's, meaning a socialist society. Socialism with extraterrestrial characteristics. Unlike Posadas, Sir Gairy wasn't a leftist. Actually, it's somewhat hard to tell what he was exactly. His politics were all over the place. Time magazine attempted to solve the ideological puzzle of Grenadian regime by inventing a new term: Warlockracy. But I guess Gary's magic didn't work too well because he still had plenty of enemies. This is why he created his own personal Caribbean SS called the Mongoose Gang, which sounds like something straight from Fallout. Despite being called a gang, they technically were a part of the police force, but with extended powers. Handpicked by the Prime Minister, the Mongoose Gang was responsible for silencing critics, breaking up demonstrations, as well as straight-up murdering opponents of the regime. In January 1974, the Mongoose Gang killed a man named Rupert Bishop. Rupert was a father of Maurice Bishop, a charismatic young political activist inspired by Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution. He studied law in London, where he was exposed to Marx, Mao, and the Black Power movement. 3 crates of ammunition had been smuggled to the island from the United States. They were labeled as petroleum jelly. Something was obviously going on, but Gairy decided not to delay the planned visit to the United States, thinking that after so many years in office, his rule is probably divine in nature and thus coup-immune. And besides, he had more important things to do outside the country. He must lobby the United Nations to take action on what he called a matter of great concern to Grenada: the flying saucers. Early the next morning, Bishop contacted his military commanders and said the code word that signaled the start of the coup: Apple. The ministers and apparatchiks of the Warlocratic regime woke up in their beds with guns pointed at their faces. The Mongoose News Gang's secret police unit was rounded up and jailed. There was little to no resistance. The coup was largely bloodless. A total of 3 people have died, and not a single member of the revolution was injured. That was bad news for the United States. It was bad enough that Castro held Cuba. Now the southernmost of the Antilles had fallen to the communists as well. The Soviets had the Caribbean in a grip. US shipping and air lanes were at risk. Bishop was certain that Gary would not surrender the Prime Minister's office without a fight. He would try to mount a counter-coup, that's for sure. Bishop was convinced that the warlock would hire foreign mercenaries to do the job.